Thank you, everybody, for showing up tonight. This is a super exciting program we have in store for you. Never Alone, an interview with author June Wong. Sasha Sinskonen, our museum educator curator at Pioneer Museum here with the Arizona Historical Society, is your host. I'm just kind of the intermediary here. With Dr. James Wong, this is going to be super cool. The Arizona Historical Society was established by an act of the first territorial legislature on November 7th of 1864. The Arizona Historical Society is Arizona's oldest historical agency.
What are you going to do?
Oh, I can connect it to the TV.
Our mission is connecting people through the power of Arizona's history. We work very hard to do that. If you're interested in supporting our agency, we have a special license plate that you can purchase. If you're interested in that, you can go to our website, azhs.com.
Oh, because I'm a participant. They include people in the audience.
April 6th is coming up, and that is the annual Arizona Gives Day. So I just want to remind everybody to give to your favorite nonprofit. And Arizona Historical Society is indeed a nonprofit. If you're interested in visiting one of our 4 museums, 2 are currently closed. We're waiting to reopen, but the Arizona Heritage Center in Tempe and the Arizona History Museum in Tucson are both open for limited days and hours, Tuesday through Saturday, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. The exhibit highlights in Tucson, we've got Barry Goldwater's ham radio at the Arizona History Museum in Tucson, and in Tempe at the Arizona Heritage Center, we have Still Marching from suffrage to the hashtag #MeToo, and that is still ongoing as well.
A lot of people watching.
We've got a couple of virtual programs coming up. If you're interested in seeing the entire calendar of events that we have, go to azhs.gov/calendar. Coming up at the end of the month on March 31st, it's a Wednesday night from 6 to 7. We have a program called Objects We Leave Behind, What Our Belongings Teach Us About the Past. You can find out why objects add an important perspective to the historical narrative. And then coming up on April 10, a Saturday midday program from 2 to 3 is called Stalking the Wild Foods Experts of Tucson, which will discuss foraging wild foods and exploring foodways from prehistoric times to the present. And then on April 15th, on Thursday, we have David Turpey, Arizona Historical Society's Vice President of Exhibitions and Publications, will give a synopsis of the book, The Girl in the Iron Box. If you join the Arizona Historical Society, you get a bunch of perks with that, 10% discount at all the AHS museums and gift shops. The museum gift shops, also you get a subscription, a quarterly subscription to the award-winning Journal of Arizona History, and so much more. Plus you get to go to all the museums, the Arizona Historical Society museums in the state at no charge. If you're interested in that, go to azhs.gov/membership. And now available on a website called Project Muse is the full Journal of Arizona History, which will be accessible to you also via membership. Visit our website at azhs.org for the latest news and events. At this point, I want to remind everybody to please turn off your microphones or mute your microphones if you could, please. Sometimes we have unstable internet here in Flagstaff. It's helpful if you turn your video off. Also, you will be able to come back to life at a time in the program so that we can have a question and answer period with Dr. Wong. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Sasha Siskonen.
Thanks, Jill. So I just want to do a really quick, very abbreviated overview of what was going on in Flagstaff before the Wong family arrived, so that you all know the context for Dr. Wong's book and what it was like here. So give me 1 minute to share this. So this won't be long, but I did want to just make sure we all understand the Flagstaff connection and the history happening here. So Flagstaff, as many of you I'm sure know, was founded in 1882. This is a picture of early Flagstaff, the old town that burned down. 1882, also a notable year because the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed that very same year. So that was the first major piece of American legislation that kept people out of America and that targeted a specific group. Because of course, for a long time, you just showed up and they let you in, no questions. But then in the late 1880s, that starts to change, and it particularly targets the Chinese community. All across the Western United States, there is a reaction to this, and there is a lot of anti-Chinese sentiment. So people are attacking Chinese folks. They are burning down businesses. It's kind of similar to what we'll see later in 1919 with the Red Summer, when that same thing is happening to African American people. So there was precedent already of this happening to Chinese folks. And Flagstaff is no exception. Here in Flagstaff, there were some Chinese folks working. The railroad, of course, had just come through northern Arizona. So people were in town who were working on the railroad or working in businesses in town. And so we have these newspaper clippings. I'll read you this that tell us that there was a committee, an anonymous committee of people in Flagstaff who tried to scare the Chinese people who were here out of town and force them to leave Flagstaff. So this is a clipping from the newspaper, and I'll read it to you because it's kind of hard to see on the screen. It says, Flagstaff, Arizona Territory, May 5th, 1887. You are hereby commanded to get the quote unquote Chinamen who reside in your houses in Newtown out of same inside of 10 days or suffer consequences. Signed, just committee. So it was an anonymous group of Flagstaff men, I believe, for the most part, who were trying to scare the Chinese community out of Flagstaff and force them to leave. The response to this letter that you see below it was written by Emma Gonzalez at the time. She is a white woman who married Gonzalez, and she lives downtown in Flagstaff, and she does not like being told what to do. So her response, published in the newspaper, I'll read it to you as well. She fights back a little bit. So you can see she responds, Flagstaff, May 16th, 87. In answer to the above anonymous letter, received this AM, written by a person or persons styling themselves committee on Chinese question, I have only this to say, that if another spasmodic eviction of, again, quote, Chinamen, that's not a good term to use, is to convulse Flagstaff, let it be so. But don't think for a moment to bulldoze me by such letters, much less to make me your servant. Every man, woman, or child our government welcomes to our ports, so far as I am concerned, shall know the meaning of 3 cheers for the red, white, and blue. So she writes into the paper to say, don't push me around, don't push these people around, you have no business doing that. Emma Gonzalez, is also featured in our resilience exhibit along with Dr. Wong's mother, Dew Yu Wong. So she is another story that we tell. We don't know exactly who was on the committee because it was anonymous, but there is a note in another issue of the newspaper that tells us a couple names. You can see the headline here. This is under citizens meetings. The Chinese requested to leave the town by September 1st. Now, this is ongoing. So this happened over a couple of years that people were kind of forced out. Folks would come back. People were forced out again. We know from this news article, PJ Brannon and Dr. Brannon were part of this group. So they're two well-known names here in Flagstaff history who were part of this anonymous group trying to force Chinese folks out of town. You can see from the census, so Jill kindly was digging through the census a while ago, and 1900, so a couple years later after 1887, you can see a bunch of Chinese names, and of course, it asks you where your mother was born, where your father was born, and where you were born. So you can see China, 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 China. So it didn't work, or it didn't stick, this committee's proposition to kind of force people out of town. Folks did come back. They worked here in town, often for the railroad or in businesses, often single men who wouldn't stick around for long. So they would head out of town, and other folks would come back. No one really stayed put and settled here until the Wong family, which we're going to talk about. If you don't know a lot about this period of time, I do recommend the PBS documentary called The Chinese Exclusion Act. It is free to watch online, and it gives you a really good overview of what was going on in this time period and just how violent and terrible things were for Chinese immigrants and also Chinese citizens who were born here in America. So do check that out. I'll put the link in the chat in a minute. So that's what's happening before the Wong family gets here. So that's kind of, they don't, they're elsewhere at this point. Then 1915, the Wongs show up. Here's an early family photo, and you can see Dew Yu when she was younger in the side picture. So that's when she first moves to America in 1915. And then you can see Dew Yu, June, and some of the older children in the picture from 1921. Here's their first business. They bought the American Laundry and would later go on to own a bunch of other businesses and restaurants. We'll talk about that later on. Here's Dr. Wong when he was a baby. So this is a cute picture from the book that he shares in the book when he was 2 years old, and you can see Flagstaff in the background there. Family picture. This is once all the kids are born. So you can see Dr. Wong there with his arm on the side of the couch. And then his parents and siblings and some of the grandchildren as well from 1941. And then a couple family members who came to join us in 2019 when we had our grand opening for the Resilience exhibit. So you can see the panel in the background. We included Dew Yu Wong in our Resilience exhibit. It's all about women in Flagstaff's history. So we wanted to share her story of resilience, having this big family, running businesses, working very hard here in Flagstaff. So she joined us, and that's when we got to meet Dr. Wong, and he told us he was writing this book, and we were so excited. And so then he sent it to us, and I've read it, and it is wonderful. If you haven't read it yet, we have copies you can buy from the museum. So I put our phone number up there if you want to give us a call if you don't have the book yet. We'll figure out how to mail it to you, or you can pick it up at Pioneer if you're in Flagstaff. You can pick it up at our Tucson Museum if you're in Tucson. So get in touch if you want to buy the book. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to start and just ask Dr. Wong a few questions to get us going. And then if people want to jump in, you can put questions into the chat box, or you can unmute and ask them yourself too. So thank you so much, Dr. Wong, for joining us. I want to read your bio, just in case there are folks who don't know you. I know there are a lot of friends and family on the call, but just in case any other people are joining us, I'm going to read your bio real quick before I start asking questions. So James Wong is the 12th child of Wong June and Dew Yu, and grew up in Flagstaff, Arizona, going to school, playing sports, and working in the family's laundry. His family members were so involved with sports that they are listed in the Flagstaff Sports Hall of Fame. After attending dental college, he became a dentist and moved to Tucson, Arizona with his wife, Aura, and practiced for 45 years before retiring. He is well known in the community and became a member of the Arizona State Board of Dental Examiners. For years, he and his sister Margaret, who at the writing at the time was 96, with the help of nephew Steve Wong, collected and researched the family's history and assembled many rare historical documents and photographs. The end result is this book. So the book has lots of great pictures and documents in it, so I do recommend getting a copy and checking it out. It's a really fun read. It's funny. Dr. Wong has some great stories about his family. It's also heartbreaking. There are some tragic stories, but very moving and a great read. So welcome, Dr. Wong. Thank you for joining us.
First of all, I want you to know that my father was born in 1882, just after the law was passed, the Chinese Exclusion Act.
Right, and he was born in San Francisco, right? So he was an American citizen, but documentation was sometimes hard to come by.
Well, he was born in San Francisco, but with no birth certificate. I mean, he was born in Chinatown, and that's where he lived, grew up, and that's the only place he lived in San Francisco.
Fascinating. Yeah, and so let me start with this question then. You did a lot of research on your family's immigration story. Grandfather came over from China, and then your mom, of course, later would come. But can you tell us a bit about the research you did to fill in the story for the book?
Well, most of the story is the reason why I wanted to write this book is to clarify a lot of things. The first thing, for 70 years, I didn't know my father was not born in China. And none of the family knew either, because on his headstone, in his grave, the legend on the headstone says, it tells of where his origin was in China, but that's not where he was born. That was where his family, his father was from. And the reason why I know this is because my sister and my nephew and I went to the archives and got the transcripts, the original transcripts for the entry into Angel Island, where they were interrogated. And I read these transcripts over very carefully, and that's where I learned about my parents. Because my father died when I was 6, and I was oblivious to the family. And then my mother died when I was 12, so I never got to say goodbye to them or talk about the family. So that's what prompted me to put this story together, along with all the documents and papers and pictures that my sister Margaret and my brother Lima had gathered, but never revealed them to anybody.
Wow, yeah. I mean, that's one of my questions too, is a lot of people talk about writing a book about their family history, but never do it. So what motivated you and got you to actually do the work?
Yeah, it's true. Ever since I wrote this book and talked to people, they also talk about writing a story about their families. It's a really amazing. But what got me to do it, with no literary background, I've never written more than an essay in college English 1. And I gathered all this information, and I had a real good friend in high school who later became a professor, and he was a well-known philosopher who wrote several books. And he was the one that actually motivated me to actually write this book. He says, I think you have a story to tell, and based on facts.
He was right.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have guessed from reading it that you weren't a writer, because it is very engaging to read.
Yeah, I have no literary background. So.
Well, can you tell us, and you already touched on this a little, but did you learn other things about your family that you didn't know by writing the book?
Yeah, you know, I encourage everyone who gets the book to read the transcripts in the back of it, and you will learn a lot about your ancestors, especially the family, which is in its sixth. I can't keep track. I think we're either in the sixth or the seventh generation now, and I think it was time to put it in writing, at least on my side of the family, so that it can be passed down to generations to come. I think it's pretty important. Otherwise, it will never be told. It's a story that could never be told without the transcripts.
That is such a gift, yeah, to the family. There's a great picture of everybody. I'm sure there's more now, but it's a big.
That's only about 60% of them.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Our family is huge.
That's awesome. So I want to talk a minute about your name too, about the Wong name, because it's interesting. If you know Flagstaff history a little, there was some confusion here with your dad's name, because of course in China, they put the surname first. So
Right.
he went by Wong June,
Right.
June being his given name and Wong being the surname. And that confused some folks in town, even to the point where some of your siblings have different last names, right?
Yeah, you know, Flagstaff is a small town. We were the only Chinese there. And I guess the nurses or the doctors were confused. They didn't know what name to write down. They wrote down what they heard, and that's how it came out. So,
and then in the book, you talk about the history of the Wong surname and how I loved the story too about the Wong Benevolent Association, because we have read a lot about mutual aid societies here in town, especially connected to the Hispanic community when we did our Todos Unidos exhibit. So could you tell us a little about the Wong last name and the Wong Benevolent Association?
well, the Wong name, there are millions of Wongs, maybe more than that, but the Wong Association in San Francisco was formed to help those with the last name Wong, to help them in all their problems in assimilating into the American way, and to keep them abreast of what the laws were and how to exist in America. And that's what it was all about, which is a godsend to my father, because his mother died when he was 3, and he depended on them and the missionaries and whatnot. He survived.
Yeah, and if you watch this PBS documentary, things were not easy for folks in those early 1880s, 1890s years in San Francisco, all along the West Coast. People were really being discriminated against. And the Wong Benevolent Association and other mutual aid groups really saved lives and helped folks.
Yeah, if you strayed from Chinatown, the confines of Chinatown, you were either beaten or sometimes killed. It was tough on them. That's why my father never left the confines of Chinatown
That must have been really hard.
until he left.
Right, and then he comes here to Arizona. Can you tell us a bit about what life was like for your family here in Flagstaff?
Well, they came over, from China. There were two boys and my parents. And it was a real cultural shock because of the weather and the the fear of living under duress. And they survived. My mother washed clothes on a washboard and hung the laundry on a clothesline, or had them spread all over the house when it was too cold to hang them on a clothesline. But they did it, one piece of laundry at a time, and they eked out a living.
And your father was very lucky too, right?
In what do you mean?
Didn't he win a lot of raffles and lotteries and things?
Well, he worked his way, they worked their way up, and somewhere along the way, he did win the Chinese lottery, $20,000, which was a fortune in those days. And that's how he began to build his estate and his own empire.
And so what was Flagstaff like when you were a kid growing up?
Well, Flagstaff is a very unique town, and we lived right in the middle of town, literally 200 yards from the railroad track, and right next to it was Highway 66, that famous route, and our lives were controlled by the trains, and we always had to know when the trains were coming and when to cross before, because they always stopped right in front of right on our street, because the train depot was right there. And it was a small town, and going to school, the classes were small. In fact, most of my classmates, I think we went like from first grade through high school, we always were in the same classrooms throughout. And at that time, the town was segregated, the schools were segregated. And funny story is, we had a Dunbar school, which the blacks attended, and there was a school for the Spanish kids. In Flagstaff, we hardly ever heard the word Mexican. They were all Spanish kids. And mostly is because most of the Hispanics that lived there were descendants, or were part of sheep herding families from Alsace-Lorraine, the Basque people.
Mm-hmm.
They were from Spain, and they were called Spanish kids, and they had their own school. And then when my family came along, they didn't know where to put us. And my dad was a little bit of a politician. The reason why we went to school in the grade school with the white kids is because my mother used to cook Chinese food for the superintendent of schools. And instead of building a school special for us, we got to go to school with the white kids.
Oh, wow.
That's a true story.
Small town. Just gotta do some favors. We don't have time to talk about all your siblings because you have many siblings, but I did want to talk about one who was particularly important to you. So could you tell us a bit about Lima, or William Bill, as many people knew him?
Well, I think William or Bill or Lima, we called him Lima. I think that he had the temperament of my father, of all the boys. My temperament hadn't been formed yet, but he was like, when my parents were gone, he was like the patriarch of the family. Families are the glue of the family. Most families is the parents, whether it's the mother or the father. but he was the glue, along with my sister Margaret. She was like the matriarch because we were all left alone after my mother died, and he was the hardest working one in the family, and he always kind of watched over the family. So what happened is, and then in World War II came along, and by the way, my father died in the year World War II started. He died in June of 1941, and World War II came in December 7th, of course, 1941, I mean, 1941. And needless to say, Lima was the favored son. And for more than one reason, you know. And then he got, the war came along, and three of my brothers who had to work in the laundry one was mobilized. He was in the National Guard. He got mobilized, went into the Army, and then my brother Lima got drafted. He went in the Army, but he went into the Air Corps. And my brother Bob, his name was Thea. He went into the Navy. And I'll talk about my brother Lima because he was a true war hero. And he became a bombardier and flew like 20 or 30 missions over the Pacific during World War II, and won a distinguished Flying Cross and every medal you could win. And he had no fear. And he was a true war hero. And even on R&R, when he was in Hawaii, he and his fellow flyers were treated like heroes in Hawaii. They had parades for them, and they had luau's and everything else. And he was a true hero. And my mother was so worried about him all, but she was so proud of him, you know. And this is in like 1945, I think he got out of the Air Corps, came home and went to work. And I got to tell you the one story I always tell about, everybody's heard about it before, but in around 1993, I was playing in a golf tournament at my golf club, and I got paired with this guy that was also a member, and we were riding down the fairway, and you always say, well, what did you used to do, and where are you from, and everything. And he says, well, he was a retired Air Force guy. His name was Bill Barker, Colonel Bill Barker. And I said, oh yeah. He said, what'd you do? And he said, well, I was a pilot. And I asked him what kind of planes he flew. And among others, he said, well, I was a pilot in a B-24. And I said, well, my brother was a bombardier in a B-24. He did island hopping in the Pacific. And the guy looks at me and he says, was his name Willie Wong? And he was my brother's pilot on a lot of bombing missions. Now this is like 55 years after World War II. I run into this guy, and I'd known him for a while, but I never asked him what he did. And I was
Crazy.
astounded. Yeah.
What a coincidence. Yeah, that story's in the book, and it's so great. It gave me chills when I read it because it's just such a neat connection and a moment where you get to come together and talk about your brother, who really, he helped to raise you, because after your parents passed, you were still so young. The whole family, I feel, could be included in our resilience exhibit, because you all had to step up and take care of each other.
Well, he was my legal guardian. And there was, when my mother died, there were three of us were still minors. And my sister Margaret, I think she took over my sister Marjorie, who was she was probably 15 or 16. And my brother Jackie, he went into the Navy when he got of age. But the family stuck together, and I think, thankfully, that they stuck together for us minors until we could find our way, you know.
Mhm. Well, I could ask other questions, but I don't want to. I want to open it up to others in case people have questions. So if you want to unmute or turn on your video if you'd like and ask Dr. Wong a question or share a story about if you knew him or the family, please do. You can also type in the chat if you want us to read your question.
Uncle Jimmy,
Yes.
I was wondering, I heard the story that Wong June came to Flagstaff and he thought it was the most beautiful place in the world, and that's why he decided to settle there.
Well, actually, he thought there
Hey,
was
Monty.
beautiful money here.
How you been?
Oh,
No, this is good.
He was actually working in the laundry.
How have you
in
been?
Ashport. You know, Ashport's.
Yeah, how are the acquisitions going? Growth?
Who was that?
thank you.
No, but he figured
Mhm.
that Flagstaff was a better opportunity because there were more people, there would be more customers, because his idea was he was going to open a laundry up in Flagstaff. Maybe the scenery, you know, it is a beautiful place.
Yeah.
We all know that. That
Other
was my
questions?
niece, that was my grandniece, Liz.
Yeah, we've got a bunch of family and friends joining us tonight, if you're not family or friends.
We have a question in the chat from Step Raptus and Lisa Chow. How many of your family still live in Flagstaff?
Right now, I have one nephew and I have one niece. My nephew Steve and my niece Margaret's. Steve is Lima's son, and Margaret has a daughter, Annette. I think that's all that's there. There's so many of them, but I think that's all there is in Flagstaff right now. Correct me if I'm wrong, family.
Bobby is still there.
Who?
Bobby and Evelyn.
Oh my God, how can I forget Bobby? I'm sorry, Bob. You know, Bob is, I'll tell you about Bob. You know, my oldest brother, who's 26 years older than I, he was married before I was born. And Bobby is my first nephew. And we grew up like brothers because they were all about the same age. When we were little, they used to call me Jimmy, like I was their brother. Now they call me Uncle Jimmy because it makes them feel younger.
We have another question, and you do talk about this in the book a little too, but Sandy and Stuart asked, what was it like to move to Tucson and become part of a much larger Chinese community?
Yeah, you know, that's one thing that I lived with all my growing up. I never had a real social life that I missed out on for one reason or the other. But when I got to Tucson it had its own Chinese community. They had their own club, they had their own picnics, they had their own bowling league, they had their own softball teams, everything. And I fit in real well. In fact, several of my family, including my brother Lima, married their spouses, and my spouse are all from Tucson. So anyway, the Chinese community was a real godsend for me. You know, forget everything else. I really, I embraced the new social life that I enjoyed with being with Chinese people.
And your wife sounds just lovely. You write about her in the book too. And like, she was just the greatest.
Yeah, she was born and raised there. Yeah.
Someone else asked, let's see, Steph and Lisa asked, what happened to the laundry? What happened to the business?
Okay, what happened? You know, when World War II came and my brothers had to go to the service, all that's left really basically was my sister Margaret, and she wasn't, you know, she wasn't up to running the laundry. And one big thing, my mother didn't speak hardly a word of English, spoke good Spanish, but no English, could not read, write, or speak it. We employed several Hispanic girls, you know, doing the folding and this and that, ironing and pressing and stuff like that. And World War II came, and we have an ordnance depot where they stored munitions, and they offered these girls like 15 cents an hour more to go to work there, and they all were planning to leave my mother. So it was time to think about selling, and it so happens that a guy named Fred Montoya and his wife Stella worked for another laundry, and he wanted to own his own laundry. So it worked out well that my mother could sold the laundry, all the equipment and everything, to a guy named Fred Montoya. And she was able to live her life, you know, in retirement.
Yeah,
That's
the
what
Montoya is
happened
well
with-
known.
That's what happened to the laundry. The buildings.
Can I talk to Jimmy? This is Marvin Peterson.
Oh, hi, Marvin. How are you?
I'm
We
good.
used
I'm
to
up in
play-
Eugene,
you and your
Oregon right
cousin,
now.
you and your cousin Joe McCoy. We played a lot in the yard in there, didn't we?
We sure did. We live next door to the Wong June family on South Agassiz. And Jimmy sent me a picture of a house that we lived in, called it the McCoy House. And in the McCoy house, there were Moyers, Petersons, and McCoys, 10 of us in a 2-bedroom house on South Agassiz.
Oh, wow.
That's the way we lived.
I know. Well, you had the 2-story next door. You were at Fat City.
Yeah. Well,
We've got a few questions from people asking about languages. So did you and your siblings grow up bilingual? What languages did your parents speak?
not really. Yeah, a lot of us spoke. Some of them spoke Spanish, and of course we had to speak Chinese because my mother didn't speak English.
Mhm.
You know, my mother she was such a kind woman and soft-spoken, and I never heard her swear. She in English or Chinese or Spanish. She never saw.
Even with all those children.
She took care of all the kids and cooked and sewed, folded laundries. That's it.
That's great.
Hello, I'm Lucy Wong of Gilbert, Arizona.
Hey, Lucy.
Lucy,
Hi.
do I know you, Lucy?
No, you don't know me. Now you do.
Okay.
I'm a little bit too far for you to come visit because Arizona's really big. But I just wanted to say to you what the first time I went to Tucson, Arizona, I noticed there was a Chinese population there. I didn't go for a Chinese event there. It was probably 15 years ago. And I went there because of veterans national conference down there. And then I went with 2 gals. We got seriously lost in Southern Arizona, but we made it there. And we went to a Chinese restaurant. And I never forgot that they sat us down, they took our order. And I heard the cook and the hostess talk about us. And then they talked to us in a dialect called poignant. So
Yeah.
I understood that, and there was a population there. So when I went to that restaurant, I knew that there was a Chinese population there from that area. And then I told the cook and the hostess what they were how they were talking about us, and they would just laughed. I just wanted to say that's probably why you enjoyed Tucson.
You're
I just
right.
wanted to add that because there was a population already there. But I didn't go for a Chinese event. I went for the veterans event because I was in the Navy. But they were surprised. They thought I was probably didn't know anything about Chinese anything, but I understood them and I interpreted what they had said or talked about myself and the two gals I came with. I thought that was pretty funny.
Oh, wow.
Hoisan.
Yeah, that's where our parents were from, or where
Yes.
my mother was from.
Yeah,
My
so there must have been a lot of people that went to that area of Arizona.
Yeah, a lot of folks, when they were asked to leave America, would go to Mexico and then re-immigrated from Mexico, and Tucson, of course, right there.
And when I went to Caracal once, that's in the Caribbean, I was on a golf cart, and all of a sudden I saw this Chinese laundry in Caracal, one of the islands. So they even went to the Caribbeans.
Thanks for sharing.
No problem.
We got another question, or maybe not a question, but Jim Durham says hi, and he is mentioning the Flag High basketball team. Dr. Wong, if you want to talk about that a little and your family's history with sports.
Who is that?
Jim Durham.
Durham. I don't
Mentions
recall.
Bill Hunter and Chuck Buttram.
Buttram. Yeah, I played with them and we worked together in Summertown. You know, I think, with the way things were, there was a little bit, I think the common denominator for everyone, whether you're Chinese or what, one of the common denominators that I took advantage of was academics, sports, and music. I mean, that doesn't favor anyone. And if you're good enough, you can compete with anybody. That's really all I could say about that. And I competed. I was, that's the way we were. If you're halfway coordinated, you can hit a ball and run without falling down all the time. You can compete. And that was, I think that's, although I was disadvantaged most of the time, I felt that there were common denominators, just like my father knew there were some, which took him out of Chinatown and took him where he was, because he was willing to take a chance. He was a gambler at heart, really. He was
But Jimmy, sports were also an assimilator too, because those of us that grew up on the south side of the track had to go to Flag High, and that was a different clientele up there. And thank goodness they had all those folks coming up from the south side of the tracks.
Yeah. When I grew up in Flagstaff, the Tucson High School had twice as many students as NAU, which was just a teacher's college back then. And, and I feel very fortunate. I went to a smaller school where I had a chance to compete and make, and achieve and retain friends that they are lifetime friends. Like
exactly.
That's
I
great.
don't think it happened in most places. It wouldn't happen.
Jill wants to know how your parents met.
Pardon me?
Jill wants to know how your parents met. Can you tell us that story?
Oh, well, let me tell you something. When someone wanted to get married, because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, there weren't very many eligible, marriageable women in mostly in California, of course. But they had something that could beat the internet. And it was an oral internet. I mean, there was more going on, over the conversation. There was always somebody eligible, but you had to go to China to get them. And that's what they did. And most marriages, well, not one, a lot of marriages were prearranged. They were prearranged. And every girl in China dreamed of marrying a quote rich Chinese American man.
Sure.
They even thought, that my mother used to tell me that they thought the streets were paved with gold in America. That's why they wanted to get out so bad.
That
My mother
PBS
was very
documentary.
lucky, huh?
Sorry. Did you wanna finish?
My father spotted her coming out of a rice field. Literally, that's how they met. But it was a prearranged marriage, believe me.
Mhm. Yeah, the PBS documentary told me something that I didn't know, which was that Chinese laborers, workers were not allowed to bring a wife back from China, but merchants, for some reason, they didn't say why, were allowed to go and find a wife and bring them back. So that might be a reason why a lot of people wanted to open a business, because you got more freedom and could have a family.
Well, I think that could be true, but I think one of the main reasons is they weren't a threat to American jobs. If a man had a business, he wasn't bringing somebody else come over to take somebody else's job away. I mean, that's what it's happening now. When you think about it, even with this COVID thing, it's like history's starting to repeat itself. You can compare COVID to rationing. Rationing affected every American. And then World War II, and then, it can happen. A lot of things are going to happen. So anyway, that's one. But there were reasons. They did all kinds of things to stem the flow of Chinese. Like when they got done with building the railroads, they didn't need us anymore, but they didn't know what to do with them. And that's why one reason why they passed that law.
Right. And your mother had an exciting trip over. You talk about in the book that she was very nauseous on the boat, but it turned out, what happened?
Yeah, well, yeah, they another reason they had the Angel Island, was like Ellis Island, is if they could find if anyone had a disease, they could be deported. They wouldn't let them into the country. And my mother was so sick from the trip on the ship. They were in steerage, which is down on the bottom deck, never came up for air. And she was sick the whole trip. And when they saw her, they thought she might have a disease. And they put her in quarantine. And after everything was over, they discovered she was pregnant. That's why she was so sick.
Oh, that must have been a rough trip.
Yeah, it was. She used to tell me, she used to tell me she was so sick, and she said she will never get on another boat, regardless, or fly in an airplane. Because she was so nauseated. She said she didn't want to do that again.
Sure. Another airplane story is when your brother, when he met his wife, right? That's a great story if you want to tell that one.
Well, that's how he met her. Yeah, well, this story has been told many times, but basically, the Pinky's parents did not want their daughter to marry this certain guy in Tucson, and my brother said, "Well, why is she going to marry him?" Because she was going to marry him anyway, and she says they don't want her to marry him, and she says, "Well, why don't?" What and someone in the party, we were down there for a party, a dance, Chinese dance, by the way, and someone challenged him to do something about it, and he took it up and took him up in his airplane. He had his own airplane, took him up in the air the next morning and stayed up in the air and did loops and turns and flips and wouldn't come down. He was running out of gas. And he wouldn't come down until she promised not to marry this guy, and he talked her out of it.
He must have been very charming, because I don't know if that would have convinced me.
That's what he did. And then they got married, and they lived happily ever after. Yeah, he was some person.
Yeah, he sounds like it, really like a larger than life guy. Well, we're at the end of our hour. Does anyone else have questions? Or Dr. Wong, do you have anything else you want to share?
No, I don't know. How does anybody have any questions? Well, the only thing I can say is, if you're yourself, you're gonna make it in society. Just be yourself. Use the common denominators as best to your advantage. Don't force yourself, and you will come out okay.
Excellent advice. Well, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. If you don't have the book yet, give us a call and we will get you a copy. It's really a great read, and there's so much we didn't get to talk about. Thank you for sharing your evening with us, and thank you, Dr. Wong.
Thank you, Sasha.
Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.